The morning light poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, soft and golden, spilling across the marble of Ela Mercer's bathroom. The room was still, so still, she could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Her hands trembled. Against the cool countertop, her reflection framed by glass as polished as her life was supposed to be now ordered, pristine, untouched by him. But there it was. Two pink lines, side by side, sharp against the white plastic. Unmistakable. Unforgiving. 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks since the ink had dried on the divorce papers. Since she'd stood in a courthouse hallway with her head held high while cameras clicked outside. 3 weeks since she told herself she was free, her breath caught. She sank slowly to the heated floor, the silk robe pooling around her like spilled wine. She had imagined many futures after Damien Cross, but never this, never with him still in her veins. The apartment around her was a testament to control white orchids in perfect bloom. Glass vases arranged at exact angles, the faint scent of lavender diffused through hidden vents. Control had been the only thing she could cling to after the implosion of her marriage. After the public scandal, her mind pulled her backward, uninvited, to a night that had seared itself into her bones. Charity gala, Damien's hand at the small of her back, his smile, the kind that made entire rooms fall silent. Later in his office, her surprise visit, she opened the door to find him between the long legs of his head of PR, manicured fingers curling into his collar. The look on his face had been the final crack. She didn't wait for explanations. She didn't want them. The world had feasted on the story. Ela Mercer, the jewelry designer turned socialite, walking out on one of the city's most eligible men. Headlines called it the scandal of the season. She'd built her wall high after that, layering it with quiet routines and careful distance. She thought she'd done it, that she'd sealed him out. But life had other plans. Her hand drifted to her still flat stomach. The shock was jagged, but beneath it something warm flickered, hope, maybe, or terror disguised as something gentler. She imagined telling him, watching those cold steel eyes soften the way they used to in the quiet moments, before ambition and pride had swallowed them both. She also imagined the other possibility that the news would pull her back into his orbit, into the glare of cameras, into boardroom whispers and questions that cut too deep. She stood, forcing her breath to steady, and slid the test into the pocket of her robe. No one could find it. Not the housekeeper, not a friend, and certainly not Damien. She'd built a life where she controlled the narrative, but this was a chapter she didn't know how to write. Still, she knew one thing with the same certainty as the lines on that test. Damien Cross would find out. He always did. And when he did, the fragile world she'd built might shatter all over again. Damien Cross stood in his glass-walled office high above the city, his reflection merging with the skyline as storm clouds. Gathered over the rooftops below the world saw a man in command, sharp suits, silver cufflinks, every detail calculated, but inside his chest a pulse. He could not steady pounded against his ribs. He had been mid-sentence in a meeting when a notification lit up his phone. It was not a message, not a call, but an article. His eyes caught the headline before the words even made sense. Ela Mercer cited leaving Manhattan Women's Wellness Clinic. The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking her. Chestnut hair pulled into a sleek knot, her hand unconsciously resting against her abdomen for a long moment. He could not move. The words on the screen burned into him sharper than any boardroom. Betrayal, 3 weeks since the divorce, 3 weeks of keeping his distance, believing that was what she wanted, 3 weeks of fighting the instinct to go to her, and now this. His assistant's voice broke through the fog. Mr. Cross, the board is waiting downstairs. He ignored her. The board could wait, the markets could wait, everything could wait, because nothing mattered more than the possibility that Isla was carrying his child. He tried calling once, then again, each ring landing like a blow to his ribs. Voicemail every time he called again. And again, until even he lost count, listening to the same cool professional message she used for business deals, never for him. He turned away from the skyline, moving with purpose toward the private elevator. The weather was shifting, wind pressing against the glass, but he barely noticed. Get the helicopter ready, he ordered over the phone. His pilot protested. The storm was building. Visibility would be bad. Make it happen, Damien said, his voice low enough to freeze the conversation. The ride was Violent, the city blurring below in sheets of rain, every dip of the craft tugging his thoughts back to her. He saw her as she was the day they met, challenging him across a conference table, saw her the night she left, eyes filled with something colder. Then raged something final. The helicopter touched down on her building's rooftop. Lightning splitting the sky as he strode to the access door. A guard moved to stop him, then recognized him. No one in the city didn't know their story. Tex Golden. Couple reduced to tabloid carnage. The elevator ride down was slow, his wet hair plastered to his forehead, his heart slamming harder with every floor. When the doors opened, he saw her in the hallway just beyond the living room she was in. A soft sweater, the color warming her skin, one hand protectively over her stomach. "You re-pregnant," he said the words, breaking from him before he could stop them. Her eyes narrowed, her voice edged with that dangerous calm, very observant as that. "What they teach you at Harvard these days." He took a step toward her and saw her flinch, but she did not move away completely. The storm outside crashed against the windows, but the greater storm was here in this room where 3 weeks of silence and 3 years of history collided, and neither of them knew if the next step would shatter them or bring them back from the edge. The silence between them felt alive, charged with the kind of tension that made the air heavy. Damien's shoes left wet marks on her polished hardwood floor, his eyes never leaving hers. Isla's fingers tightened over her stomach as if guarding the life inside from him from the storm. "From everything, you have no right to be here," she said, her voice calm, but her shoulders rigid. He stepped closer anyway, the scent of rain clinging to him. "I have every right if that child is mine." Her jaw tightened and something unreadable flickered in her gaze. "Do you think one news article gives you permission to storm in? Here in the middle of a thunderstorm like some conquering hero?" She asked, the faintest tremor in her words. He ignored the barb and reached into the inside pocket of his suit, pulling out a small velvet pouch. She blinked in confusion until he dropped it on the table and the contents spilled out. "A gold charm bracelet. I bought this the day you left," he said, each word deliberate. "It was meant to be a reminder of everything we had before that night, the night you walked into my office and saw what she wanted you to see." Isla's lips parted, but she said nothing. Damien took a breath, and the admission came out rough. "I did not touch her. I was trying to push her away, but she knew you sometimes visited without warning. She set the stage because I had refused her before, and it was her last way to punish me. I have proof." Ilza's eyes narrowed, suspicion and something more vulnerable fighting in her expression. "Proof." He pulled out his phone and slid it across the table's security. Footage time. Stamped emails, messages from his head of security detailing what happened after she left, when he fired the woman within hours, when he offered her severance only in exchange for her silence. Isla stared at the phone without picking it up. The storm outside cracked against the glass, sending a jagged streak of light across the room. She finally looked up at him, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw her walls slip, but then her expression hardened. "You could have told me that night. You could have run after me. Instead, you let me believe the worst." His voice lowered, and for the first time she heard something almost like fear. "Because I saw your face and I knew you were gone. I thought if I chased you I would only break you more, so I stayed away. It was the worst mistake of my life." Another flash of lightning filled the space. The baby moved beneath her hand, and she flinched, not from pain but from the sudden awareness of him standing so close, so unshaken by the storm. "You are not staying," she said finally, her tone steady. Damien inclined his head, but his eyes held a vow. "I will not stay tonight, but I will not leave your life again." He walked out. Moments later, the air seemed thinner, but the tension thicker. The storm followed him into the night, and Isla stood alone, her hand on her stomach, the sound of rain pounding against the windows and the unshakable knowledge that Damien Cross never made a promise he did not intend to keep. The waiting room was quiet, except for the low hum of voices and the occasional rustle of magazines. Ela sat, with her hands folded over her lap, eyes fixed on the frosted glass door that led to the examination rooms. She told herself she did not care if he came. She told herself she had only given him the appointment time, so there would be no accusations later. But when the door opened and Damien walked in, she felt her pulse trip over itself. He looked different from the storm-drenched man. who had stood in her apartment days ago. His suit was still perfectly cut, but his tie hung a little loose, and there was something unguarded in his expression. He scanned the room, found her, and for a moment the whole world seemed to narrow to the space between them. Mila thought about looking away, but could not. His gaze held hers as he crossed the room without hesitation, lowering himself into the chair beside her. "I said I would be here," he murmured, his tone not arrogant, not demanding, just certain. The nurse called her name, and Damien rose with her, following into the small room where the air smelled faintly of antiseptic. She climbed onto the table, the paper cover crinkling back. Beneath her, Damien stood at her side, awkward in the cramped space, his hands clenched at his sides, until the technician rolled in the machine. "This will be a bit cold," the woman warned as she applied gel to Isla's skin. Isla gasped at the shock, and before she could think, Damien's hand closed gently over hers. She almost pulled back, but then the room filled with a steady, rhythmic sound, the rapid heartbeat of the life growing inside. Damien's breath caught the grainy image on the screen, showed a tiny flicker of movement. The sound was impossibly fast, impossibly strong. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, and when she looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "That sours," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might break the moment. Isla's throat tightened. She forced her gaze back to the screen, ignoring the way his voice pulled at something deep inside. The appointment ended too soon. The image vanished, replaced by the sterile white of the machine's idle screen. The gel wiped away, leaving her feeling strangely exposed. Damien helped her down from the table without asking, his hands steady under her arm. In the hallway outside the room, he hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "I know you want boundaries, Isla, but I will be here for all of it. The appointments, the questions, the nights when you can't sleep. I'm not letting you do this alone." She stepped back, creating space between them. "We are not doing this for us, Damien. We are doing this for the child." He nodded slowly, but the faintest curve of his mouth told her he had already decided otherwise. As she walked toward the exit, she could feel his gaze following her, not heavy, not invasive, but certain, and deep down she knew that certainty was dangerous, because Damien Cross never set his mind on something without finding a way to get it. The city glimmered under the early evening lights as Isla sat across from her oldest friend Mara in the corner booth of a quiet wine bar. Mara listened without interrupting as Isla recounted the ultrasound appointment, every detail from the cold gel to the way Damien had held her hand. Mara's eyes narrowed the moment his name came up. "He still trusts him to Isley," Mara said finally, her tone low. "You might want to believe he's changed, but men like Damien don't turn into saints overnight. He could be playing a long game." Isla bristled. "He's shown up to every appointment he hasn't pushed. He's even kept the press off my back." Mara leaned forward. "Exactly, he's doing everything right to perfectly." Isla's brows drew together. "What are you saying?" Mara's smile was sharp. "I'm saying let me test him." The words unsettled her, but Mara pressed on. "I'll approach him like an investor, someone looking for a high-stakes deal. I'll give him every opportunity to slip, every excuse to cross a line. If he's truly changed, he'll pass. If not better, you know?" Now Isla hesitated, torn between loyalty and a creeping fear. Mara was only voicing the doubts she kept buried. "Fine," she said, "but keep it subtle." 2 days later, Mara walked into Cross Tower wearing a fitted charcoal dress that balanced corporate polish with just enough edge to draw the eye. She introduced herself at reception and was led up to Damien's office. He rose from behind his desk to greet her every inch. The controlled businessmen, they talked numbers, projections, market entry strategies. His answers were precise, his focus unshaken when she let her hand brush his during the exchange of documents. He simply shifted back and continued speaking about regulatory compliance. Later, Mara arranged a chance meeting at a charity mixer. She wore crimson silk and stood close enough for her perfume to be unmistakable. Damien greeted her politely, but his eyes scanned the room, clearly searching for someone else. She pushed further, suggesting a late dinner to go over potential terms. His refusal was immediate and final. By the third encounter, she was almost certain he knew she was testing him. They crossed paths at an exclusive gallery opening. She leaned in close under the low light, murmuring something suggestive enough to draw a reaction. Instead, Damien stepped back, his voice steady. "I love Isla, and nothing will change." That the next morning Mara arrived at Isla's apartment unannounced. Dropping into the armchair opposite her, "You were right. She admitted he didn't take the bait once, and I gave him plenty of chances." Isla felt something tight in her chest loosen, though she tried to keep her face neutral, what she didn't see from the window was Damien across the street, leaning casually against his car, watching until Mara left his expression unreadable. As if he had just confirmed something he had known from the start, that the walls between him and Isla were beginning to crack, and that once there was an opening, he would find his way through. Winter sunlight spilled across Isla's apartment as she shuffled into the kitchen in soft slippers. The scent of ginger tea already steeping on the counter, she stopped in the doorway. Damien stood there, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair slightly mussed from the wind. He had a paper bag of fresh pastries on the counter and a toolbox at his feet. "What are you doing here?" she asked, trying to ignore the way her pulse jumped. He glanced up from tightening the hinge on one of her cabinet doors. "Fixing the things that keep squeaking. I remembered you mentioned it last week." She opened her mouth to tell him. She could have called maintenance, but the words died. When she saw the extra care in his movements, it had been like this for weeks, ever. Since Mara's test, Damien showing up for small, unglamorous moments, a bag of the rare fruit. She craved at midnight a quick drive to the clinic when her blood pressure spiked, even sitting quietly beside her during long evenings when she was too tired to speak. She wanted to believe it was for the baby, but sometimes the way he looked at her made her wonder if it was something more she fought. The thought away, telling herself not to fall into old patterns. But it was getting harder that afternoon. He offered to take her for a short walk along the quiet path in the park, the air crisp and edged with the faint smell of pine. They moved slowly, her hand resting on his arm. He didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence, just stayed close in it. Way that felt steadying. At one point they stopped by a frozen pond, watching the last leaves tremble on bare branches. Damien reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I've been going through old files at the office." Said quietly, "There are things you don't know about that night when you walked in." She tensed, not ready to open that wound, but his voice was calm, patient. "I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I just want you to see the whole picture when you're ready." His fingers brushed hers as he placed the paper into her palm. They walked back without another word. But something had shifted the barrier between them, thinner than before, that evening as she lay in bed, the folded paper on her nightstand. She felt the baby kick strong and certain. She pressed her hand to her stomach, and an unwelcome thought whispered in her mind. Maybe he isn't just fighting to be part of our child's life. Maybe he's fighting for me too. Across the city, Damien sat in his penthouse office, staring at the same skyline they once shared. A view of the paper he had given her was only the first piece of proof. The rest he kept locked away, waiting for the moment when she would finally ask for all of it, because when that moment came, he planned to make sure she would never walk away again. Snow drifted lazily past the tall windows of Isla's living room as she stood beside the half-assembled crib, her hands steady in the frame. Damien was on the floor, tightening bolts, his dark sweater dusted with sawdust from the wooden pieces they had unpacked earlier. The radio hummed softly in the background, filling the space between them. When she reached for the instruction sheet, a folded envelope slipped from between the pages. Landing near his knee, he picked it up and froze. His name was scrawled in his own handwriting, the date written across the top, from the night she had left him. Isla watched his jaw tighten as if he were holding back words. "What is that?" she asked, her voice careful. He sat back on his heels. "It's the letter. I wrote you after you walked out. I thought I destroyed it." She took it from him, feeling the weight of the paper heavier than it should be. "Read it," she said quietly. His voice was low at first, then steadier as he continued. He spoke of the regret that had followed him every night, the things he should have said, the truth about the woman in his office, the decisions that had let ambition get in the way of love. He told her he had fired the woman within hours, and how he had wanted to run after her but thought she would be better off without him by the time he finished. Ilsa's eyes burned. She held the letter like it might slip away. She let go. "I needed to hear this months ago," she whispered, You let me believe something that wasn't true because I was a coward, he admitted, because I thought I'd lost you forever. Before she could answer, a sharp pain twisted in her side, making her gasp. Damien was on his feet, instantly steadying her with strong hands. The baby, she breathed. Something's wrong. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed her coat, wrapped it around her shoulders, and guided her toward the door. The elevator ride down was a blur, his arm tight around her waist, her breath coming quick at the curb. The car door swung open before she could protest. He was already inside, beside her, telling the driver to move. Illa clutched his hand, unable to hide the fear in her eyes. Damien's thumb brushed over her knuckles. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "Both of you stay with me." The city lights flashed by in streaks of gold and white, the sound of her breathing and the pounding of his heart filling the space between them. Neither spoke the words they were both thinking, but both knew this was the moment that would decide if everything they had rebuilt was strong enough to survive the storm that was coming. The hospital lights were harsh against the midnight hour. As Damien pushed through the emergency room doors, his arm wrapped firmly around Isla, her face pale, her breath shallow. The nurses moved quickly, guiding her onto a gurney. Wires and monitors, appearing as if from nowhere. The steady beeping filled the space, like a clock counting down her. "Blood pressure is dangerously high," one of the nurses said over the noise. "Possible preeclampsia?" Damien kept pace beside the bed, his grip on her hand unyielding, his voice low. "Stay with me, Illa. We are not losing her or you tonight." They tried to move him back, but Illa's fingers clung to his with surprising strength. "He stays," she told them, her voice tight with pain and fear. The attending doctor, a sharp-eyed woman, nodded. "Keep him calm. Keep her calm." Her blurred into a haze of medical jargon, medications, and the sound of rain hammering against the high windows. Damien sat at her side, his tie discarded, his sleeves pushed up as he read every flicker of the monitor. He spoke softly about anything to keep her anchored. The first time they met, the crooked smile she gave him when she signed her first big client, the way their child's heartbeat had sounded like a drum in the ultrasound room. At one point she turned her head, her eyes glassy. "I was so sure leaving you was the only way to save myself," she whispered. "I never imagined we would end up here." Damien's hand tightened over hers. "I can't change how I failed before, but I will be here for every breath, for every moment from now, Ona." Sudden alarm jolted through the room, the baby's heartbeat dipping, then recovering. The doctor's orders were quick. Controlled more fluids, more monitoring. Damien felt the air squeeze from his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "We've come too far to break now. Isla, you're the strongest person I know." By dawn, the danger had eased. The monitors showed a steadier rhythm. The storm outside was giving way to pale morning light. The doctor approached, her expression softer. "She needs complete bed rest from now until delivery. Any stress could trigger another episode." Damien didn't hesitate. "I'll move everything to her apartment, whatever she needs." Isla tried to protest, but her voice was weak. Damien brushed a strand of hair from her face. "This isn't up for discussion. You are my priority now. You and our daughter, ass." They wheeled her to a private room. He walked beside her, the envelope, with the letter still in his pocket, like a vow unspoken. He knew the crisis had changed something, not just in her health, but in the space between them. The walls were thinner, the silences less hostile, and beneath the fear was the steady knowledge that he would not step away again. Not for storms, not for pride, not for anything. The weeks after the hospital scare unfolded in a strange quiet. Damien turned Illa's apartment into a command center, his laptop open on the coffee table, his phone set to silent during her naps. Every meeting shifted to her living room. He kept track of her medication schedule with the precision of a surgeon, setting alarms for each dose. Illa had never seen him like this. The man who once thrived on power lunches and late nights in glass towers, now measuring out her tea and fluffing her pillows. She fought the urge to tell him it was too much, because part of her knew she didn't want him to stop. One late evening, as snow drifted past the windows, she stirred awake from a restless doze to find him sitting beside the bed reading aloud from a pregnancy guide, his voice low and steady. When he noticed her watching, he smiled, a tired, genuine smile. "You were twitching in your sleep. I thought maybe reading would calm you." She laughed softly. "I am not the one who needs calming." Damien closed the book. "Maybe we both do tha." Peace didn't last a week before a sudden sharp pain ripped through her abdomen. Damien was at her side in an instant, pulling her coat around her shoulders and calling for the driver. She gripped his arm hard as another wave hit her. "It's too soon," she gasped. His voice was firm and steady. "We're going to the hospital now. Hold on." The emergency room lights flashed by as they rushed her into an examination bay. Damien's chest tightened. When the monitors flickered, the doctor's words blurred in his ears. Possible early labor. The phrase made his blood run cold. He stayed close, speaking into her ears steady words from a man who had faced hostile takeovers, but never fear like this after. Hours of observation, the doctor confirmed the contractions had stopped. False labor this time, but the warning was clear: any further stress could bring the real thing. Damien guided her back into the apartment that night, his arm around her, and didn't let go until she was safely in bed lying. There, with the faint city glow seeping in through the curtains, Illa reached for his hand, her fingers sliding between his. "You're not just here for her, are you?" she asked quietly. Damien met her gaze, his voice rough. "I'm here for you both, always for you first." She pressed his hand against the curve of her belly, feeling the baby shift under his palm. "Then maybe I'm ready to believe you for the first time in months." The air between them felt unburdened. No accusations, no guarded silences, only the sound of their breathing in sync, and the quiet certainty that the distance they had lived in for too long was slowly disappearing, replaced by something deeper, steadier, and far more dangerous to her resolve. The night before her due date, the city lay under a thick hush of winter snow. Illa sat propped against pillows in the dim glow of the bedside lamp, the apartment warm with the scent of chamomile. Damien sat opposite her on the armchair, a file in his lap untouched, his gaze fixed on her like he was memorizing every detail. She broke the silence with a question that had been sitting in her chest for months that night. "I left you in your office. Did you know I saw everything?" Damien's jaw tightened. "I knew you saw what she wanted you to see. She cornered me about a deal, then made sure the door was open at the right moment." Illa searched his face for any flicker of deceit, but his eyes were steady. Before she could answer, a sharp, intense pain gripped her belly, this one different from the others. Her breath caught. Damien was beside her in a heartbeat, holding her steady, timing the waves with quiet focus. When the second came faster than the first, he called for the car, his voice low, but urgent. Snow was still falling as they sped through the sleeping city, her fingers clutching his. The skyline blurred in the windows. The hospital staff were ready the moment they arrived. Damien never let go of her hand, even as the room filled with movement, voices, overlapping instructions. Hours later, with dawn barely breaking, the cry of their daughter filled the delivery room. Damien's head bent over Isla, his forehead against hers, his voice breaking. "She's perfect." Isla looked at the tiny life against her chest, her skin warm and soft, and for a moment the months of mistrust and fear felt like another lifetime. But quiet didn't last. As the nurse wheeled the baby to be checked, a figure appeared in the doorway, the head of Damien's PR team, the same woman from that night, her face pale, her voice trembling. "I need to speak to you both." She stepped inside, clutching a tablet, the screen alive with headlines and photographs. Someone had leaked the news of the birth, along with intimate details of Isla's hospital stay and pictures taken without consent. Damien's expression turned to stone. "How did they get this?" The woman swallowed. "I think I know who, but it's not just about the photos. They've been tracking you for months." Illa's arms tightened protectively around the baby. Damien stepped closer, his voice cold and certain. "Then we end it." Now as he moved toward the door, Illa watched him with a rush of realization. This wasn't just about repairing what they had lost. It was about protecting the future they had built in spite of everything, and for the first time she believed, without question, that he would burn the world to the ground before he let it take either of them again.